Okay, and then we'll also be can we record at the same time? No, we cannot, right? So we're just streaming.
Maybe we can try.
Let's see what's gonna happen. Okay. Okay, guys, I think we're ready to go. Yeah, it's already 5 minutes past. We're very happy to have you all here. So good afternoon, everybody. Some new faces, some old friends, right? So it's very good to see you all. Be welcome to our open class in which we'll be talking about this remarkable short story, The Yellow Wallpaper. Let me share my screen with you. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Can you see the slides? Yeah?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let's start.
Hey, everybody. So welcome to all of you. So if this is your first time here joining one of our open classes in a book a month, we're very glad to have you. I am Anna. I'm a teacher and founder of A Book a Month, and I am a postdoc in literature. I'm a PhD in literature. Therefore, right, so together with audio, we have this partnership in teaching literature in English for all of you, and to talking a lot about the world literature, which is something that we really enjoy. Audio is also a PhD in literature, and he's at the moment doing his postdoc in Italy at the University of Padua. And perhaps some of you might have heard his podcast before, Literatura Viral. It's on pause at the moment, but he promises that he will come back very soon, right? Upon requests. And we do this partnership together in A Book a Month, which is a course reading project mostly dedicated into practice and improving your language learning in English, right? But with a different method, which is deeply alternative and very effective, which is learning literature without any kind of adaptation, mostly authentic texts. Right. And we have been doing this for quite some time. This year, we celebrate 4 years teaching. We started in 2020 during the pandemics, right? And we have keep working since then. And we're very happy to join you for such a long time, which for us, it's very meaningful, and also very happy to welcome you into this class about this amazing and very important short story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, The Yellow Wallpaper. And this class that you're going to see today is actually, it has already integrated in the past the short stories course, which is a weekly course that we offer here. Each classes happen every week, and all of the classes, they are based on the reading and sharing discussion upon a short story that has been previously decided. And The Yellow Wallpaper has been read in the past, and this is the list of authors that we have this semester, right? We have already had our first month of classes reading Gogol and Charles Dickens, and these are the authors that you're going to see today. Yes. So usually in a regular class, we open for various comments and conversation during class, but since this is an open class and we are in a great number here, we leave the comments and the questions for the end of the presentation, and then you have like plenty of time to and access to us to expose your point and ask questions as you wish. Okay, to you, Audi.
Yeah, we were very glad when we decided to make this open class about the Yellow Wallpaper. We were quite happy because I think it combines very well both of our expertises. Because not only this is an anthologic short story, right? You see it all over the place. It is one of the classic short stories of American literature, but it's also combining my expertise and Anna's, right? Because on the one end of the spectrum, this is a story about women and women roles in society. And that's definitely Anna's expertise. But then on the other end, it is also a story about the history of medicine, right? And about psychiatry, melancholy, depression even. So, which is precisely what I do in my academic research, thinking about the medical humanities. My podcast, which Anna mentioned, Literatura Viral, is in Portuguese, and it's precisely making the dialogue between the history of medicine and literature, right? So it's this weird area between the humanities and, I don't know, health and disease, you know, like, so the health sciences and the humanities. So we'll be discussing this paper today, this short story today, sorry. As Anna mentioned, if this was a typical a book a month class, we will start with a discussion of your impressions and hear what you have to say about the topic. We won't have the opportunity to do this in the same way today. We'll do it in the end of the class. But one question that I would invite you to ask yourself right now is, you know, when we read this short story, we are seeing the story of this woman that is being currently treated by her physician, right? Her doctor is also her husband, by the way. So he's like, you have a double figure of authority over there, a husband and a physician. And she's being treated by what is called, and something that was actually practiced at the time, which is called a rest cure, right? So she's basically just resting. She's not having contact with anyone. She's not allowed to read or anything else. So it's quite boring, to say the least, right? And she's telling us her story, and she's writing it to you without the others knowing, right? So there is even an element of secrecy, a certain pact with the reader, as if we were her confidants in a certain sense, right? She's opening herself to us. She's confessing her internal thoughts to us, something that she cannot do to any other character in the story. She cannot do that to her husband. She cannot have the same intimacy with Jenny, for example, the other woman that is mentioned. She cannot have that intimacy even with her brother, because her brother says that her husband is right, and this is the right treatment for her, right? And so we're seeing that this event through her eyes, okay? This point of view is very, very important. And so the question that I would invite you to ask yourselves is precisely how the narrator's point of view impacts the story, and how does it impact what we also have to say about it, right? I think there are two key issues that are presented to us that are formed precisely because of this point of view. First and perhaps the most important is that we're seeing how oppressed this unnamed woman is, right? Although she's going through this medical treatment, and the objective of this treatment is actually to cure her, right? She's feeling a bit low, she's feeling a bit depressed, and so they want to do something good. They want to reverse this and bring her to a healthy state of mind. But the treatment that they devised to do that not only is not helping at all, but it's actually making things much worse. Plus, to make things even more stranger, she is the one that is telling everybody, like, guys, this is not really working, and nobody's paying attention to her, right? So we see how this benevolent oppression is really taking a toll, okay? Taking a toll. She's paying a price for this societal pressure that she's suffering, right? So this is one of the things that we're seeing. It is very much a story about the societal expectations about women at this period. This short story was published in the end of the 19th century. But then there's another element, there's a very interesting one, which is she starts to grow insane little by little by little. When we get to the end of the story, she's having a psychiatric event, you know, an episode. She's definitely maybe not completely mad for life, but she's definitely a bit off when we get to the end of the story, right? So we see this process. We see while we read this short story, at the beginning of the story, she's perfectly capable of logical conclusions. She's capable of knowing what is reality, what is her perception of things. And while we read it like day after day after day, and then she tries to dialogue with them, to tell them, you know, this is not helpful, this is making things worse. No, nobody's paying attention to her. And then little by little by little, she starts to lose her grasp over reality. And by the end of the text, we see how she got into that position. So I think this is one of the key elements about this short story. We're seeing how someone goes mad. We see the degradation of her psyche little by little by little, okay? Literature is showing to us something that we cannot really appreciate in life. You know, if you're losing your grasp on reality, how could you realize this? You know, the less you realize, the more confusion you make between reality and fiction, the less you will realize that you're making this confusion. You know, the very idea that you're confused is precisely that you're not able to discern reality from imagination, right? And this thing showing us how someone goes mad is something that is a hallmark. It is something that is very typical of modernist literature. So this short story is a proto-modernist story. It's something that is in the 1890s. It is exploring a phenomenon which will really, really be very much explored in 20 years' time, 30 years' time. You know, Virginia Woolf will be definitely one of the key authors doing precisely that, okay? And she's basically one generation younger than Charlotte Perkins Gilman, right? One important thing for us to keep in mind about the Yellow Wallpaper is that this short story was published in a magazine or in a newspaper. They were very similar in the end of the 19th century. This was in Portuguese. We often use the French term, roman de feuilleton, or folhetim is how we call it in Portuguese often. But in English, they prefer the term serialized. Okay, so this was a story that was serialized in the same way that so many others were. Before it was published in a book, it was circulated in a magazine, just like all of these. So if you read if you bought the New York Daily Tribune in 1845, maybe you would have the opportunity to read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe for the first time. Here it is, right in the middle of the newspaper. This is the actual image of it. In 1890, if you bought the Limpingcott's magazine in July, you would be reading The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And the same thing applies a few years later if you bought the Collier's Weekly in London, and then you would read The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. So those are three great classics of Gothic literature by three very canonical authors, and all of them were published in either newspapers or magazines, exactly like the Yellow Wallpaper. It was published in the USA, okay, in the New England magazine in January of 1892. This was the cover, okay? And actually, we made available for you guys an annotated version of the text, a version that we prepared. and actually we use the original publication. So the text that you guys have seen is the original thing that you would have seen, you know, if in 1892, if you bought the New England magazine, you would be reading the original with the drawings and everything. Yes, Anna.
So I just would like to mention that usually, well, a text like this, which was published in the 19th century, well, the last part of the 19th century, but all the same, the English is a bit challenging, right? So whenever that is the case, that we're dealing with a text that is a bit more challenging for our students, then we tend to give them either a thesaurus edition, which is an edition with some glossary and synonyms to help you out with the vocabulary, which can be sometimes overwhelming, right? But also when there isn't something available, we make vocabulary lists to help you out, or we annotate the text as you're seeing in this text by by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, right? The Yellow Wallpaper, just to help you out expanding vocabulary, but also to facilitate reading and don't be frustrated, which sometimes happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like, you know, reading the original publication has a certain taste, you know, it gives us a certain feel of the original intended objectives, you know, of the story. The fact that the original text has illustrations is something that I find really interesting, because it doesn't match our expectations of 2024. We don't expect, you know, literary books to be to have images. We associate that with children's literature, you know. So the difference between having a grown-up book and having a children's book is precisely that the children's book has images. That is a naive perception of literature, especially because nearly all of these texts of the 19th century were illustrated, right? This is proof of it. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can see this is the first page of The Turn of the Screw, and you can also see the image in here. And the same thing applies to the picture of Dorian Gray and some of the short stories by Edgar Allan Poe, right? And so it gives us a certain flavor that is also quite useful. When we start reading the story, we get, she's straight away describing to us the beginning of their vacation, right? So our narrator, she's presenting to us everything from her first person perspective, right? She is the main character in this story, and she's the one that is telling us, but she does not identify. So she just starts talking, and she immediately in the very first sentence, her husband appears. But we don't really even know her name, right? So there's just a little, almost nothing, very scant information that we know about her. Then we'll have to little by little put info together while we're reading the text, right? Let's have a look at this first passage, okay, the first paragraph. Anna, can you read it, please?
Sure. It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity. But that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I will proudly declare that there is something queer about it. Else, why should it be let so cheaply? And why have stood so long untenanted? John laughs at me, of course, for one expects that in marriage.
Yeah. So we get a very interesting first paragraph, I would say, because she's giving us a certain setting of a horror story. You know, they're living vacation, it's summer. In the 19th century, there were, you know, at this time, you would not have electricity. It did exist already, but you would not have it in the US. You would have it like maybe in Paris and London, but it was something very, very brand new. So common day people would not have it, only if you were some kind of millionaire. And so in summer, you would not have air conditioning or anything, nor even fans, right? So what people would usually do, rather than going to the beach, they would go to the countryside. And often to higher ground, precisely because then it's not so warm, right? So this is what they're doing. They're renting during summer. They're renting a house for 3 months on the countryside, and also because the air of the countryside, the peacefulness of the countryside, will be part of her treatment, right? And so yeah, she needs rest and peace of mind, and so this is why they're going to the countryside. However, she finds this very suspicious, okay? Because she says that she's a mere ordinary person, like John, her husband, right? So they are normal people. They're not aristocrats. They're not millionaires. So it is weird that they managed to secure, as she says, they managed to rent this ancestral hall, okay? A hall is one of those big houses that you know, very long and that you would use to receive people, right? So the to call a house a hall, an entire house, right? It has this flavor of nobility, of aristocracy, and even the fact when she adds the adjective ancestral, right? The idea that is being, you know, like in the family for generations and generation, is both giving us this idea of aristocracy, but also this idea that it is somehow menacing, precisely because it's old, right? We all know that if you want to write a horror story, a ghost story, it has to be in some old, scary place, you know, like half in ruins. It has to be in a castle or in, I don't know, a convent or whatever. You know, you need a crazy church that is falling apart. You need some special place for weird things to happen. And she's giving us the start of the text is giving this precisely this idea. They go to this colonial mansion, a hereditary state. So she reinforces the idea 3 times, you know, ancestral halls, colonial mansion, and hereditary state. They basically mean the same thing, more or less. Okay, so she really wants us to get this idea that maybe the place they're going to is a haunted house. Okay, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity. So basically, romantic happiness, right? But that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I would proudly declare that there's something strange about this. So she does not like the idea of going there because it's such a great place. It was so cheap. So probably something bad will come out of it. Okay. So at the very first paragraph, the author is using the narrator to suggest to us that we are about to read a ghost story. Okay. And this is something that is very common at the time. You know, the 19th century is the heyday of the Gothic. Pretty much everything that was published at the time somehow is related to the Gothic. Okay, from Frankenstein to Dracula. Dracula was not yet published, by the way. It would be published 6 years after the Yellow Wallpaper. Charles Dickens has published many short stories. Louisa May Alcott, the author of Little Women, right, which was unfortunately translated in Portuguese as Mulherzinhas, right? She wrote many ghost stories too, stories about accursed mummies and things like that. So Arthur Conan Doyle, who is very famous for creating Sherlock Holmes, has written many horror stories. And even authors that did not necessarily have not written Gothic fiction per se, they were highly influenced by the Gothic, and that is the case of the Bronte sisters. Okay, Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, Agnes Grey, all those novels by the Bronte sisters. They could be. We can debate. Maybe we can consider them Gothic or just highly influenced by the Gothic, something a little bit different, but still, Edith Wharton too, who is quite famous for her realist story, has also written ghost stories. So this was very, very common, and this will continue throughout the 20th century. We often forget this, but Nabokov has written ghost stories, and so did Virginia Woolf. A month ago, in our previous open class, we were reading precisely this short story by Woolf, which is called A Haunted House, precisely. So the author is suggesting to us that we're about to read a ghost story, which was what 85% of English literature was at the time. So it made sense. However, immediately on the second paragraph, we have this highly ironic comment. John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage, you know? I don't know if many of you are married, but you know, when you marry someone, you're not expecting them to make fun of you exactly. You know, let me marry this person because for sure this person will make me fun, will laugh at me all the time. So this is great. You know, notice that in English, to laugh at someone means that you're rir de alguém. It's not rir com alguém, okay? To laugh at someone or like to scream at someone, it means that the person is not included, okay? So she's not laughing alongside you. She's being laughed at and not participating. So this is a very interesting beginning, I would say. And she will immediately start giving us more information about the situation, why they're heading towards this weirdly suspicious, perhaps haunted house in the countryside. Anna, could you be so kind to read it again, please?
Sure. John is a physician, and perhaps, I will not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. You see, he does not believe I'm sick. And what can one do? If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there is really nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? My brother is also a physician and also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics and journeys and exercise, and am absolutely forbidden to work until I am well again. Personally, I disagree with their ideas.
Thank you so much. So we get precisely the main theme of the story immediately after, right? So this is precisely the point of everything that the other 10 pages that we'll read later on. They do not take, she doesn't have the authority to decide for herself, apparently, if how she's feeling, right? It is her physician, which is, by the way, her husband, and plus her brother, who is also a physician. So the both of them are the ones that are telling her how she feels and how she will get out of it, you know? So and she is criticizing this indirectly, not very, very directly, but she's, you know, confiding in us that I personally disagree with their ideas and so on. She's not openly disagreeing with them to their faces, but she's confessing to us that she is not happy with this and that she disagrees highly. And she says this, I would not say it to a living soul, right? So we are very aware of the position in which she finds herself. And this is a very precarious position. She's not taken seriously by the people around her, and she does not have the independence necessary for her to confront them in any way, right? And when she says anything, it is immediately dismissed as a slight hysterical tendency, and therefore it's not taken seriously, okay? You know, it is like when you're drinking with friends, and some friends, when they drink, they start either laughing a lot or crying a lot or doing both, right? And then when we have to talk with a friend that is crying because they're drunk, we do console them, but we do not console them so seriously because we know that it's the alcohol speaking. And this is exactly the way she's being treated by her husband and her brother, who in here are very shallow, right? They're not two-dimensional. Her brother doesn't even have a name. Her husband, we only have two characteristics. His name is John, and he's a medical doctor. That's it. We don't have anything else. So basically, they are symbols. They're symbolizing something else, right? They're symbolizing a whole way of a society to behave towards women at this point in time, right? Yes, Anna.
I just wanted to add something as well, because the whole story has a very an aggravating tone of infantilizing the narrator and the woman who was talking to us, right? And so much so that she's put into the nursery, right? Which is the room which is usually dedicated into be occupied by the children, right? Either babies or when they are growing up. And so she's in there, and often she's treated with this kind of contempt and condescendence, which is sadly the way that sometimes we as adults treat children, right? Not giving them the voice that they should have, right? But implying authority in it, and just like say, oh, okay, oh, so cute, right? You cannot be treated serious for what you're saying.
Yeah, I would just add that when we do this for children, we are justified in the sense that children do not really understand fully the world, right? And therefore they need guidance by adults, right? And by treating her like children, precisely they're proving the point, right? That they're looking at her as someone that has no ability to navigate the world by herself, and definitely not to disagree with them within any rational level. So I agree 100% with you. We see an entire level of turning her authority down, but at the same time, we see something very interesting. Okay, let's just continue this one. We see something very interesting, which is she's not taking this without a fight. So she is not allowed to work, and to work means to write. But she does anyway. She does keep a diary, precisely the diary that we are reading. She confides in us, so we are accomplices on her disobedience, right? So it is a kind of civil disobedience in a certain sense. And she's very ironic from time to time. So she's not taking this passively. I think often she's pretending to accept this, but she's making fun or via irony, or just criticizing without necessarily making fun. But we can see things like when she says this, so I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is. Basically, who cares? Any goddamn thing they're giving me. So we can see a certain level of criticism in here, because it is not important at all, so much so that she's just like saying the name, yeah, whatever. She's being very dismissive, and plus she's being dismissive, but giving us a list of many things that are part of her treatment, right? She has to have tonics, she has to make journeys and air and exercise, and forbidden to work, and so on. She cannot have social contacts. She has to be kept away from her child, and so on. And so by giving us all that list of many, many parts of the treatment, we realize that it's so complicated that it becomes a little bit ridiculous, like what can she do in the end, So we could say that by describing the treatment to us in this way, she's being very critical of the whole situation. And sometimes she'll be outward ironic, okay? So irony is a figure of speech. The technical definition of irony is when you say the opposite of what you mean, okay? So let's say it is, I don't know, 0 degrees, okay? It is very, very cold. And then when I get into the room, I say, whoa, it's warm in here, I'm being ironic because I want to emphasize that it's very cold, but I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying, oh, it's so warm, maybe I should take off my shirt or something. This is the technical definition of irony. And she's definitely using this throughout the story. So we selected a few sentences for you to test this. So we have 4 of them here. Decide for yourself which ones are ironic. in this sense of the technical definition. She's saying the opposite, okay? So we have seen one of them already. He's a very careful, no, we have seen this one. John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. Another one is this. He's very careful and loving and hardly lets me steer without any direction. To steer is to move, okay? So I cannot move anyway, and he's giving me, he's telling me what to do. I cannot even, I don't know, move my arm, and then he's already telling me what to do. And this proves that he's very careful and loving. Then another comment, it was nursery first and then playground and gymnasium, I should judge. For the windows are barred for little children, and there are rings and things in the walls. And finally, the wallpaper scholar is repellent, almost revolting. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. Okay, so you can decide for yourself. I'll give you a few seconds. And then we can check it out. So I would argue that the first one is definitely criticizing John because, you know, not allowing her to do anything, not even to, I don't know, wave her arms or walk around the house without telling her what to do. Is definitely something that is not very careful, not very loving. But I would say that this is not necessarily the opposite of what she's intended. So maybe this could be sarcastic, but not necessarily ironic by the dictionary definition of irony. When we're, you know, when we use in everyday speech the word irony, we would definitely apply to it, and we would not be wrong, okay? I'm just using the technical definition in here, which is the second example. You know, John laughs at me, but one expects that in marriage. No, this is precisely the opposite of one expects in marriage. And this sentence was scandalous enough for the newspapers in 1892 that nearly all versions, besides the original one, which you guys have read, have taken this sentence down. Okay, so they published the story in its entirety, but they took away this sentence. It was too much for their sense of proper behavior, let's say. Another interesting thing about the irony is that this will be a key element in the toolkit of modernist writers, right? Virginia Woolf is very, very ironic all the time, and so is James Joyce, and so are many of the modernists. So irony is one of the key features of modern art in general, not only in literature, right? Then we have this description of the nursery, right? Which is the room in which she will be kept for most of the time. Little by little, the story starts to get a bit bizarre, right? Because she becomes a kind of a prisoner, right? Not only because she's being imprisoned in her own mind, right? She's really bothered by the wallpaper and things, but also because we realize that she cannot get away from that room without authorization from the others. And there are bars in the windows, and there are rings, okay? Rings on the walls. So she misreads, actually. She thinks that this is a nursery, a room for children. But actually, you know, why would you have a huge iron ring attached to the wall, okay? You would use it for chains. Okay, so actually what we have to imagine is actually that someone before her was attached to the wall, you know, like in a prison of some kind, you know, a pit of some kind, you know, like when we see in the Man in the Iron Mask or those movies, you know, in the Middle Ages, someone is there like with the chains, they are attached precisely to a ring to the wall. So maybe this is the case in here. And the fact that the wallpaper is collapsing and it has marks of fingers. She interprets this as being the marks of fingers of children playing, but most likely it's not. Okay, most likely someone has been imprisoned in that room already. And I think we can all guess if that person was a guy or a woman, right? We can all guess the gender of that person. So suddenly, we're not necessarily treating with a ghost because perhaps this previous person was an actual person, okay, not a ghost, but it's suddenly getting the twist into a horror story too, right? And this brings us to the last sentence, because she says the wallpaper scholar is repellent, almost revolting. So almost it makes almost you want to vomit. So yellow, the color of disease, the color of food that is getting spoiled. So you have this idea. This is why it makes her think about vomiting. It is revolting. No wonder the children hated it. Okay, because once again, she's interpreted that someone attacked the wallpaper. She's interpreting that this was the children. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. And this is not an irony, according to the technical definition of the term. However, literary critics often call this structural irony, because she does not know it yet, but she will be imprisoned in this room, and this wallpaper will definitely compromise her mental health. So she's saying this: I would hate it myself if I went through this situation. And she's precisely about to go through this experience. So by telling us this is structurally ironic, because precisely the opposite of what she has just said will happen. Okay. There are many examples of this in literature, structural ironies, and this often creates a lot of tension with the audience, because the audience knows that something terrible will happen to the hero of the story, and this is precisely the point, which brings us to the reason why she's being kept there. She is following an actual regime of mental health that did exist at the 19th century. This is a real life 19th century treatment, which was called the rest cure. This treatment was initially developed for tubercular patients. So basically, people suffering from tuberculosis. They thought at the time that tuberculosis was in some way psychosomatic. And so it was the disease of sensible people. And so if you were too sensitive, if you were a poet, if you were an artist, or if you were a woman or a child, you would somehow, you're too good to this world, and somehow your body will start to decay via tuberculosis, precisely because you were almost like an angel or something. And this is why one of the treatments for tuberculosis, let's remember, there were no antibiotics at the time, so there was nothing you could do. And tuberculosis was the biggest killer out there, be it in Europe or in the USA. Okay, 1 out of 7 people who died because of tuberculosis. So it was really a very fearsome, a very dreadful disease. So this is one example. This is a sanatorium in the USA, in Denver, and you can see the people outside. Okay, they're getting some sun, but they're doing this while resting in their beds. Okay, we are used to this even for children. Okay, this is another sanatorium in New Zealand. Okay, in which the children once again are getting some sun therapy, but without doing anything else. They have to be there without moving, just side by side. And we all know the sanatoriums in Switzerland, right? This is in Davos, and it is precisely the sanatoriums in Davos that have inspired Thomas Mann to write The Magic Mountain, right? So they are all there, they're all doing nothing, and precisely their lives in the sanatorium is what he explores. Like many other writers, one great example is also a woman writer in Brazil, Gina Silveira de Queiroz, who is really, really a great writer. Floradas na Serra is exactly about the same thing. A woman that goes to sanatorium. She has tuberculosis, and you have this idea that she's having tuberculosis because she's such a nice, sensible person that somehow she's collapsing. And so we do see that nearly every time you see someone in literature that has tuberculosis, nearly always it is a woman, okay? This is the case in opera too. La Traviata, for example. She dies of tuberculosis, woman. And you know, there are so many examples. La Boheme, same thing. The main character, a woman, dies of tuberculosis, you know? And so on. There are many examples. And this actually happened to Charlotte Perkins Gilman herself. The rest cure was idealized by this guy, okay, Silas Weir Mitchell. He's a neurologist. He's quite important for the history of medicine. The rest cure is one of his infamous contributions. He was absolutely wrong. Not only rest cure did not help at all, but actually it made people even sicker. And Charlotte Perkins Gilman was treated by him after having her first child. She went into postpartum depression, and she was brought to Silas Weir Mitchell, who prescribed her this. This is exactly what he said, okay? Live as domestic alive as possible. Have your child with you all the time. Lie down an hour after each meal. Have but 2 hours of intellectual life a day, and never touch pen, brush, or pencil as long as you live. Okay? So if you don't want to die, you can neither write, nor paint, nor think. Okay, which is also a painter. Besides a writer, she's also a painter. So basically, don't do anything smart. Just, I don't know, bake some breads and take care of your kid, basically. And he appears in the story at some point. She says, John says, if I don't pick it up faster, he shall send me to Weir Mitchell in the fall. But I don't want to go there at all. I had a friend who was in his hand once, and she says, he's just like John and my brother, only more so. And so the narrative itself is criticizing Weir Mitchell by using his name directly. And this is really, really deliberate, so much so that Charlotte Perkins Gilman actually was polite enough to send him a copy once the short story was published. So she got the magazine and sent it to him as a gift, precisely to be like, you know, a slap with the glove, you know, like, and she is in this passage in here, actually, before that, she's mentioning that they had some visitors, okay? It was good to see a little company. So we just had Mother and Nellie and the children down for a week. Of course, I didn't do a thing. Jenny sees to everything now, but it tired me all the same. So this sentence, Jenny sees to everything now, it will become one of her preoccupations, because Jenny is her husband's sister. The husband calls her to the house to help running the house, okay, which is one of the few responsibilities that were actually allowed for women to engage with. But in her case, not even that. They don't allow her even to run her own house. And they call this other woman, who, by the way, is his sister. So it is clearly another element in this power struggle, right? Because it's not only any woman that is taking care of the house in her behalf, but it's also his sister. And so we see also, just like John and her brother are symbolizing men in general, Jenny is actually providing to us a contrast between two ideals of women at the time. Okay, the ideal woman who would be running the house very efficiently and without falling sick, and then this kind of rebellious wife who is very, very rebellious and is even writing to us confession by herself, you know, so and allowing herself even to be ironic just with us, you know. So the text is being even a bit sarcastic over there, you know, because she's not rebellious at all. Maybe at the end of the narrative, once she got crazy, but for 90% of it, she's not even confronting them. She's not exactly being passive and accepting what they're doing. She's developing her own ways to resist it, but she's definitely not rebellious in this sense that she's actively opposing them. And you know, she's not alone in the criticism. Virginia Woolf, a generation later, would engage in exactly the same thing. As you know, she suffered many episodes of mental health throughout her life, eventually hearing voices. Eventually, she even killed herself because of that. She lost hope of being cured, basically. And Virginia Woolf was also prescribed rest cure maybe 30 years, 20, 30 years later, after Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And she also criticizes this in literature. If you're reading Mrs. Dalloway, perhaps her masterpiece, or actually one of them, because Virginia Woolf has written so many. At a certain point, Mrs. Dalloway, the main character, says exactly this. You, and she's talking to a few men, okay? So you men invoke proportion, order, rest in bed, rest in solitude, silence and rest, rest without friends, without books, without messages, 6 months rest, until a man who went in waiting 7 stone 6 come out waiting 12, okay? Yes, Anna.
And even she discusses it very openly in the essay A Room of One's Own, which discusses literally about the idea of like having the opportunity of, in this case, also the chance of being dedicated into writing, right? In not having to do a woman's considered to be like regular work at home and then dedicated into putting it into their writing. And I mean, like if she had heard Weir Mitchell, the history of literature would be like significantly different if she had stopped writing. So
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the damage, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, same thing applies for Virginia Woolf, right? And I'm done. I'm letting space for Anna shortly. But one thing that we have to keep in mind from medical theory at the time is that she is called a hysteric in the short story. And hysteria is coming from Latin, which is coming from Greek. Hysterikos, or better, the word hyster in ancient Greek means uterus, okay? So sterikos in ancient Greek means suffering from the uterus, okay? I know this is bizarre, but that is the case. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, right? This is exactly the name he uses for hysteria. And so because of this etymology, throughout the entire history of medicine, until the early 20th century, it was really agreed upon. It was a scientific fact that hysteria, so basically poor mental health, right, or having hysterical episodes, it's something that only women can suffer from, because you need it means that it's a disease that is emanating from the uterus. And if you don't have a uterus, how could you be hysteric, right? One of the first essays of Freud is precisely arguing that men can be hysterical and that there is no connection between hysteria and the uterus. So it will take 2 millennia, actually, or even more, because Hippocrates wrote 400 before Christ. And so it would take 2,300 years, maybe even a bit longer, for us to finally set this idea that hysteria is something necessarily connected to women. And there are many examples on the 19th century of so-called scientific studies that would precisely prove the point. There were, however, alternatives. It was not a medical consensus. Many people attacked this idea of the rest cure. And Charlotte Perkins Gilman is not the only one, and Virginia Woolf is not alone either, because many people within medicine were also attacking it. And one of these people is precisely Mary Putnam Jacobi, whom Charlotte Perkins Gilman went for a consultation. So she is a physician, she is a medical doctor, with whom Charlotte Perkins Gilman consulted, and she got prescribed a completely different regime of exercise and mental activity. So the precise opposite of rest cure. And I find it really, really remarkable that this was a woman physician, right? She was a woman, she was a suffragist, and she was the first woman to study medicine in the University of Paris. So basically, you have Charlotte Perkins Gilman having to find the only person at the time in the US that could be helping her with this, and the only medical doctor that would understand and disagree with the scientific method at this moment was precisely a woman herself too, right? So this is truly remarkable, which is to show to us that as any social phenomenon, science is also part of many of the struggles within society, right? And as I said, it was not completely agreed upon. Rest cure was a certain a part of health practitioners would be advocating for it, but a large chunk of health practitioners would be disagreeing with that too. And this is at the base of the creation of occupational therapy, terapia ocupacional, okay, which is one of the areas within the health sciences nowadays. It was created precisely in opposition to the rest cure. So if the rest cure was saying, don't do anything, don't read books, don't paint, don't write, don't see friends, this will cure you. Occupational therapy is doing precisely the opposite, okay, and telling people, no, paint, write, read, do something productive, do what you like, because this will get you cured. And this is exactly what happened with this guy in here, okay? I guess everybody recognizes this painting, right? Starry Night by Van Gogh. More or less at exactly the same time, okay? This short story was published in 1892. This painting was painted 3 years before. So while Charlotte Perkins Gilman was being treated by this method, the rest cure, and being kept segregated in her room, forbidden to read, forbidden to write, and so on, Van Gogh was also in a psychiatric ward after he mutilated himself. So after he cut off his ear and tried to kill himself, he went to this psychiatric clinic in the south of France, where he was encouraged to pursue painting and to continue painting as part of the treatment. So his treatment was the complete opposite. His treatment was occupational therapy and not rest cure, okay? And it does show to us maybe that he was lucky because he got a different philosophy of health and of what cure means. But it also makes us very, very suspicious because maybe he only got such treatments because he's not a woman, right? So it's showing to us precisely, if you're a guy and you're getting depressed, then you're allowed to paint and do whatever intellectual pursuits you want. But if you're a woman at the time, this would not be exactly the case. And now, all yours.
Okay. I don't know if you have ever heard about the mad woman in the attic and you've recognized where does this term come from. Maybe you were able to establish some connections with a very famous book by one of the authors that we have mentioned here, which integrated the famous movement of Gothic fiction or almost Gothic fiction in the 19th century in English literature. Yes. And the mad woman in the attic is a spectral woman, more or less, as she is firstly described in the beginning of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, which was published in 1847, right? So it's very likely that Charlotte Perkins Gilman read Jane Eyre. Yes, we also have a Jane appearing in the story, The Yellow Wallpaper, and we're going to discuss it a little bit later. But the mad woman in the attic is first described in the story as if she were a ghostly apparition, until the point that Jane Eyre is going to really learn about who she is, right? And her real name, or maybe her given name by Mr. Rochester, who is the owner of the house in which Jane Eyre works as a governess. And he is going to hide the fact that he had a wife, and she got some kind of psychological instability. And one of the ways of dealing with psychological or psychiatrical patients at the time was really to remove them from society. And this is exactly what Charlotte Bronte depicts in the story. Mr. Rochester, he locks her up, locks his wife in the attic. He names her Bertha, which is not really necessarily her name. It's just like a name that he gave her, as if you were like christening her once more. And he hides her from society and presents himself as if he were a single man. And it's just like really with this kind of disposition that everybody sees him. And one of the reasons why Jane Eyre shows any kind of romantic interest for him in the first place. But there's even something else which is very interesting in the story, is that this woman, she is not only his first wife, right, which is going to be the case, but also she comes from a colonial heritage, right? So we know very little about her, but it is suggested in the story that she comes from the colonial plantations that England had at the time, through the business of Mr. Rochester, and he brings her into the United Kingdom. They live there. She gets crazy, which is also a way of insinuating similarities between the two things, right? A person who comes from the Americas and or the Caribbean, and then having this representation of craziness associated with them. And this is also one of the reasons why at some point, like she starts being described in the book as if she were a savage, right? So the book is at the same time criticizing the kind of treatment which is granted to women at the time who was suffering from some kind of psychiatrical instability, and at the same time showing a very open criticism to society at the time and the British Empire, right? So I think that in relation to the Yellow Wallpaper, the mad woman in the attic is going to represent the same to Jane Eyre as our narrator represents to Jenny, right? Who is the ideal woman, who is the respectable woman, the woman who is functional, and is going to always haunt her as well in the same place. So we have this double haunting happen at the same time. And in the two stories, we really do have a presentation of mental instability with savageness, with disrespect, with lack of authority, and all of that is perceived in these two characters, right? And later on, Jane is going to appear in the story, and Aud is going to tell you all about her in the next slides. Shall I read this one, or do you want to comment something first?
Yeah, if you can, Anna, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I don't want to go outside. I won't, even if Jenny asks me to. For outside, you have to creep on the ground, and everything is green instead of yellow. But here I can creep smoothly on the floor, and my shoulder just fits in that long smooch around the wall, so I cannot lose my way. Why, there's John at the door. It is no use, young man, you can't open it. How he does call and pound. Now he's crying for an axe. It would be a shame to break down that beautiful door. John dear, said I, in the gentlest voice, the key is down by the front steps under a plantain leaf. That silenced him for a few moments. Then he said, very quietly indeed, open the door, my darling. What is the matter? He cried. For God's sake, what are you doing? I kept on creeping just the same, but I looked at him over my shoulder.
That's
I've got
great.
out, alas. It's okay? Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's good. So what we see in this passage, we're already at the end of the short story, and little by little we have seen the fragmentation, right, and the really this destruction really of her personality, and she's spiraling down into madness, and she's what she means by I was creeping around. Is that she's like touching the wall, okay, and like with her back, and she's like moving. When you creep, is when you move in a very deliberate way, not to make noise, not to be for people not to see you or not to realize that you're present, right? So she's running around throughout the walls of the room. She has locked herself inside. She has destroyed the wallpaper, and she's just like lurking through, by following the wall. So she's acting very weird. And when John arrives, she talks to him by looking over her shoulder like this. And also it is a very weird way to talk to someone. And she's super calm, however. So now we see an inversion of action in here, because John was always very, really treating her like a child and always very calm. And he was the one dealing the cards. And right now what is happening is the opposite. She is in control of the room, and she knows where the key is, and he tries to get inside, but he cannot. And now she's very calm and talking to him in a very colloquial manner, very, intimate, like, why? There is John at the door. It is no use, young man, so very very intimate, very unpretentious. However, he is a bit different, a bit desperate, like, for God's sake, open the door, things like this, So we see a complete inversion of roles over there. And then we see this remarkable declaration at the end of the story that sometimes we might not even pay too much attention when we're reading, but it is a crucial element for our interpretation. I've got out at last, said I, in spite of you and Jane, and I've pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back. Now, why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time. So basically, he manages to enter the room, but he faints after he realizes that she's mad, and he faints by the wall, right? So she continues to walk throughout the room by lurking at the wall, and she's like, she has to pass over him to do this. So it's very interesting because she keeps doing whatever she was doing before his arrival. And we see that now in madness, she's actually finally released at last. So this is the moment of her victory, let's put it this way. A very bitter victory, right? Because in order to be free, you have to go insane. It's quite a heavy cost for you to pay. But what I'm interested is in this name in here. In spite of you and Jane, the husband's name is John. Who the hell is Jane? Okay. Because the other, his sister is called Janie with double N and I and E, right? So it's Janie. And so who would be Jane? There are two possibilities here. One very practical, another really, really interesting. So the first practical thing that many literary critics say is that it should be Janie and not Jane. And then it was just mistyping, like when they printed the story, they got it wrong, and then it was published in this way, and that's it. Those are quite a few mistakes to make, however, because Janie, it is written before, I'll write in the chat, but it's written like this before. So you have to to use an A instead of an E, and you have to forget the double N, and you have to forget the I. So you have to commit three mistakes actually to go from Jenny to Jane, right? And often Jenny can be a name by itself, like not only it's not necessarily related to Jane. So there is a second interpretation for who is this person, okay? And probably you might think by you might get to this interpretation yourselves, because at the beginning of the story I mentioned that we don't know the narrator's name, right? This woman that is telling us the story has no name, or does she? Okay, maybe this is her name. Maybe Jane is herself. So in spite of you and Jane, in the sense of you and your wife, okay, the one that obeyed, in spite of you too, now I am free. So in the sense that when I'm released, I have a new identity. Nobody will make me be Jane again. In other words, I won't be this obeying, a wife accepting your authority anymore, right? So it's a very, if this interpretation is correct, and I definitely think it is one of the elements of proto-modernism that I was talking about at the beginning of this class. This is exactly the kind of thing that Virginia Woolf will be doing a lot in 20 or 30 years' time. Just giving, she's getting one seed, planting it at the very end of the text, and it's very easy for us to disregard that and continue on. But it is likely that it is possible, at least, that it is offering to us a lot of information to interpret this story, right? Another important element for us to keep in mind when we're interpreting it in this way is that this is politically committed literature, or at least not necessarily politically, but socially committed literature. Literatura engajada, as we say in Portuguese, right? This is a story that it was written for a specific purpose, which is to convince society of something, to denounce something, and to convince to adopt some other behaviors, right? And we do know that Charlotte Perkins Gilman was an activist too. She was very, very interested in getting to actual change, not only describing it in her stories. So I would say that her literary production is just one side of her work as an activist. And you can see this. This one is a newspaper in which the most famous of feminists, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, answers the timely question in a characteristically frank and forcible way. So basically, this newspaper is interviewing her, and she's describing what is feminism. And you see that they are so uncomfortable with the word. This is at the end of the 19th century, right? That they're using quotation marks precisely for that purpose. And she actually wrote a few years after the Yellow Wallpaper in 1898. You can see at the bottom here. She wrote many non-fictional books. This one is a sociological essay. Okay, so we could discuss her work as the work of a sociologist as well. Women and Economics, a study of the economic relation between men and women as a factor in social evolution, by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. So we can clearly see that there are some social, political, cultural studies that are non-fictional that she's publishing to put forward her ideas, and she's doing the same thing in literature, right? Anna, would you like to explain this part?
Sure. And she is doing the work of many other women, fellow writers, fellow activists that have not only followed her path, but also have joined her in this discussion, right? And some of these writers that you see here in the page: Virginia Woolf, Margaret Atwood, Kate Chopin, Dorothy Parker. Kate Chopin was her contemporary, right? So she is the author of a beautiful novel called The Awakening, which if I'm not mistaken, it was published in the same year in which the Yellow Wallpaper was published. And we also have writers which are mostly writing in the 20th century, Dorothy Parker and Virginia Woolf, the great Virginia Woolf. And of course, in a more contemporary example for us, right, Margaret Atwood, who continues to write and strive and be an activist and be a feminist in whatever she writes at the moment, right? And apart from Virginia Woolf, we are reading three of these authors this semester. We are reading Margaret Atwood, we're reading Kate Chopin, and we are reading some short stories by Dorothy Parker as well. All amazing stories. I'm sure you will enjoy it as well.
We're also reading in one of our courses a similar example of politically committed literature. This one in the novels advanced course, Slaughterhouse-Five. I guess you have heard this book mentioned at some point, Kurt Vonnegut. It's one of the great classics of 20th century literature in the USA. And this is very much a denunciation of World War II and war crimes committed by the Allies, actually, in Germany. And so it is a pacifistic book. Kurt Vonnegut had been to the war. And so he's doing a very similar thing. Charlotte Perkins Gilman and all of these writers, many of whom we'll be reading this semester, are using literature to discuss gender roles in society and to advocate for changes. And the same thing happens on undergrounds. It can happen on pretty much any domain of life, right? And another example is precisely the pacifism and the denunciation of war that Kurt Vonnegut does in this book, which is, by the way, a very, very funny book. And it also is quite similar to the Yellow Wallpaper, because what happens in here is that this soldier is abducted by aliens and gains the ability to travel in time. So it's a very crazy book. And you see, because he has this power, you also have it. And people think he is mad. So it's a highly modernistic exploration. Actually, some people would call it postmodern, actually, and in which we see a very similar aesthetics. Charlotte Perkins Gilman wants to show to us how a person goes mad. And this book is doing precisely the same thing, how a person that thinks he can travel in time would think. And so in the base, they're doing exactly the same thing, but using it for different purposes. We have a final comment for you guys. We're almost done in 10 minutes. Charlotte Perkins Gilman will come back to one of her essays because she is telling us why she wrote the Yellow Wallpaper in like 20 years later. But just a little bit, but before that, a little bit of propaganda. I'm sorry, guys, if you already know all of this and want to go to the bathroom, I promise I won't be sad. Just to present you very quickly our courses. This was one example of the short stories course, right? This was an actual class that we taught in the short stories course last semester or the one before that. Anna is teaching this course. I was extraordinarily invited for this class specifically, precisely because I had recorded I've talked about it in my podcast and when I'm teaching the history of medicine. So this is why I was doing most of the talking back then. And in this course, we're reading every week one short story of up to 10 pages. The idea is for our students to have a glimpse, to get a flavor of many different literary schools, different literary authors from all the world, so many different periods too, right? So these are the people we'll be reading starting this month. We have just read Gogol and Dickens. We'll be reading Roald Dahl from the next week, and then Louisa May Alcott, great short stories. We will eventually read Edith Wharton, who is a great realist writer from the US. Dorothy Parker is super funny. I love her writing. Boccaccio is one of the great classics of literature, and so it goes on. A similar course is the reading class, which is taught by me. also on a weekly basis. However, for this course, you don't have to read anything. You just have to come to class, as the name implies. And so no homework. And we'll be reading all these incredible people: Ernest Hemingway, actually William Blake, sorry, he should not be, we'll be reading him for the next 2 weeks, and then Hemingway and many other great writers, including Shakespeare, and the two of the authors we've mentioned this class, Margaret Atwood and Kate Chopin. Yes, Anna.
No.
Go ahead.
All right. So, and we also, like, these courses, they are weekly, these ones that Audio was introducing you to, but we also have courses which are bi-weekly or fortnightly, if you want to be fancy, which are quinzenais, right? And we have, they are called novels, and we have novels intermediate, advanced, and degrees. In the intermediate course, which I teach, we are reading works of fantasy. We just finished Coraline by Neil Gaiman in August, and now we're starting The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis in September. And we are reading great authors this semester: The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, Margaret Atwood, Sheridan Le Fanu Carmilla's, which actually was the basis for the composition of Bram Stoker's Dracula, right? But a vampire woman, right? Which is something very interesting in this book. This book was published in the 19th century as well. And Sheridan Le Fanu is Irish, yes. In the novels advanced course, how you can talk a little bit about the books?
Yeah, we'll be reading more contemporary classics. So this month, we'll be discussing Ian McEwan, one of the great living authors, right? Atonement, that was made into a movie, a really brilliant,
amazing movie.
Yeah.
With James McAvoy and Keira Knightley, if you.
Yeah, and the book is like so filled with suspense. You cannot put it down. I love it. Then Slaughterhouse Number 5 that I was discussing before. We'll read by the end of the semester Nemesis by Philip Roth, which is another great contemporary classic. This book was published in 2010, and it will be read forever. I'm 100% sure, because it's a true masterpiece. And our surprise reading of the semester is a little-known author, Per Lagerkvist, who is Swedish. Oops, sorry. He's Swedish, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1951, and he wrote The Dwarf, a very an existentialist novel. He wrote it and published it during the Second World War. And it's considered in the same school like Camus or Sartre, or Simone de Beauvoir, this existential pondering about reality. It's a very, very interesting book about the nature of good and evil, but it's a historical novel set in Renaissance Italy. Very interesting. This is a guy that is criminally ignored, so we wanted to value it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And also The Pupil of My Eyes, novels big reads, in which this semester we are reading the Bronte sisters. We have just started reading Wuthering Heights, and the purpose of this course is really, as opposed to the novels intermediate and advanced, in which we read one book a month, right? A book a month. We read one book every 2 months, mostly because, throughout the period of 2 months, sorry, because these books are a bit longer, and they are 19th century English and challenging. Therefore, we spend some more time with them. So we can enjoy them properly, right? So we read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte as well. The Bronte sisters are all represented here, and we're very happy to have it. Here you have like the groups that we have at the moment. You can join anytime, just talk to us, and we're going to be very happy to have you. If by any chance you feel that you are a little bit insecure while reading in English, or have never tried, or you want to have some kind of assistance while you're taking one of the literature courses, you can also be my student in the English courses. We have 2 groups. two levels at the moment, English Intermediate and English Advanced, right? And you can, if you don't know your level, you can do a placement test, which is a teste de nivelamento, and talk to us perhaps, right? But this is also very helpful if you need it. We have all of this information concerning prices also in our website and on Instagram. If you have by any chance any questions, any doubts, anything that you would like to discuss with us, please send us a message either on Instagram or on WhatsApp, and we can talk to you as you wish.
Yeah. And so to finish up in our last minute, in 1913, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, after publishing other novels, so the Yellow Wallpaper was really published at the beginning of her career as a writer. She'll dedicate herself to many non-fictional books, sociological studies for quite a long time, a lot of activism, she worked a lot like a journalism, as a journalist, sorry. And then she reevaluated in an essay the why, actually her motivations to writing the Yellow Wallpaper. The essay is called Why I Wrote the Yellow Wallpaper in 1913, so 21 years after the fact. And it is very, very brief, actually. And she says this: it was not intended to drive people crazy, but to save people from being driven crazy. And it worked. So she was heavily criticized by the press at the time for, as if somehow by reading the story of a woman that goes crazy, somehow she would, infect the readers, and the readers would fall, would all become insane themselves, So obviously a very naive and sincerely hypocritical way of interpreting this text. And she is not only denouncing that, but she's saying, no, precisely the opposite, actually. It was meant to save people from being driven crazy, and it worked, right? So basically, we have a name for this today, right? Which is gaslighting, when people around you behave in a way that leads you to doubt your own sanity, right? So this is gaslighting, comes out from a movie, a Hollywood movie from the 30s or 40s, I believe, that was called Gaslighting, and in which the husband wanted to fool his wife around, and so he would be like doing things at the house, and then he would like turn off the lights and pretend that the lights were on, or things like this. So the woman would like, why are you acting like this? And so she would start to doubt herself, and thinking she would think that she was going crazy. So we have a word for it, but she didn't at the time. But the concept is exactly the same, and she's definitely commemorating this. It's no wonder that this short story we find it in all anthologies of literature, and it was highly influential for many women writers in the 20th century, that's for sure. That's all for us, guys. Thank you so much. If you have any questions or comments or doubts of any type, please let us know, and we are here to answer.
So you can either open your mics, raise your hands, or write on chat. We are here for you. Yes, Stephanie, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for this wonderful class. I learned a lot. I have a short comment about the style, because it called my attention how detailed she described the wallpaper. And I also got a bit nauseous while reading this description, because it was like really detailed. And I have the, or it seems to me when something is very detailed described in literature, I can't imagine it at all, because the level of detail is so great that it challenged my imagination. And I had this feeling when I read the story, and then I felt like I was getting insane a little bit as well by trying to to imagine the wallpaper and the pattern, but it was impossible. And so I think through her style, she also created or made the reader feel a little bit how this woman is feeling and how she's getting insane. And so, yeah, I had this impression while reading.
This is a great comment, Stephanie. Thank you so much. I think you're absolutely right. And this is also one of the things that the modernists will be doing a lot, right? And I think we are more used to this in movies, I think, this time, right? Every now and then we hear about movies that use like subliminal messages and use certain sound frequencies, for example, that make you feel, you know, a bit dizzy sometimes, you know, like especially horror movies, but sometimes movies that want to be disturbing in some way. So cinema uses a lot of these techniques. They want to influence the way you will feel while you're watching the movie. And you know, writers can do that too. And I think you're right. It will not work for everybody, but for certain people, I think this is definitely intended, you know, and many authors in decades after will try to explore exactly the same thing, you know. James Joyce is a great example. If my character is drunk, the text must be drunk. You must feel as if you were drunk, you know? So you have to be this connection between what is happening in the story and what is happening in the text, you know? Just another example to help you visualize. There is this moment in which, in Ulysses by James Joyce, in which Stephen Dedalus goes inside a hospital for women, right? Everybody's giving birth basically there. And just because he's in the maternity ward of the hospital, Joyce starts to, the whole chapter is told by writing down the history of the English language. So he starts to use English from, you know, Old English at the beginning, and then he starts to write in Middle English, and then Shakespearean English, and then English of the Enlightenment, English of the 19th century, and eventually he gets to contemporary English. Extremely difficult to understand what is going on, because who understands anything of Middle English, let alone, you know, Shakespeare is hard enough. Who would say Old English, right? So it is exactly the idea. Just because the guy is in the maternity ward where babies are being formed and being delivered into the world, therefore my language must develop like a baby. And, you know, and the reader, the poor reader becomes insane by reading this because it's so tough. But the modernists don't really care. They want to create those effects in us. So I think your impression is absolutely right.
Any more comments? Anyone? Questions? Thank you so much for everybody complimenting in the chat. We're very happy that you took your time to be with us this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Dan,
you,
guys.
Wagner.
Yeah, great pleasure. If you need anything, just let us know, and you can find this in YouTube if you want to recommend to friends and everything, okay?
Yes.
Yeah, it was great to see you all.
Thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy your weekend. And I hope that you have enjoyed the experience of reading the Yellow Wallpaper with us. Bye-bye. Have a great time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. See ya.
Bye, guys. See you.